Call this order.
United States of America.
I'll go ahead with roll call. Committee Member Gorley. Here. Committee Member Parker.
Here.
Committee Member Reynolds.
Here.
Committee Member Yan.
Here.
Vice Chair Jarvis.
Here.
Chair Thorstad.
Here. All righty, so we will go over the approval of minutes. Anybody wants to make a motion for that?
I move that we accept the minutes as printed.
All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you.
Right, I guess we open for public comment. Since there's nobody here, we will move on. Is there anybody online? No?
There is not.
We'll go into new business. Chapter review or charter review. Cecily sent out a bunch of information. I don't know if everybody looked at that and did some reading, but there's a lot of info here. And then down in your packet, there is the Sweet Home Charter. And we discussed last time that we were going to start from the beginning.
And I will apologize. So the comparison chart that's in the packet, when I printed it out, the font was way too small. So you don't have that in front of you tonight, but I will work on reformatting that so that you can have it in front of you for the next meeting. But in the meantime, we can pull up anything from the packet on the screens.
Quick question. When you send that back to us, I noticed it's an Excel spreadsheet, which is great. And you had the first two columns frozen. Is there a way to freeze the third column as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just so I can constantly see the existing verbiage versus when I scroll
can
to the
do that.
side. Thank you. I tried to do it, but I couldn't get it to go.
So I can just open this up for discussion if anybody's got anything to say or add or anything. Go for it.
I have a question, and that is one of the things that I mentioned at the last meeting is that I would like to see, and I think that it would be beneficial for us to renumber our chapters to sections, and then have subsections that are in keeping numerically with the section that we're in. In other words, that when we go to section 2, or section 1 will have subsections 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. When we go to section 2, that it similarly the first subsection will be 1, 2, 3 to keep that to make it a more understandable outline and to keep it consistent with normal outlines.
Is there also an option to look at the way that Halsey's done theirs as far as chapter 1, 1.1, 1.2, chapter 2, 2.1, 2.2, which allows for easy expansion in the future?
Halsey's charter is laid out pretty good. There's some good info in there as well. I'll just let you guys look over things. Give you a couple minutes.
May I?
Go for it.
I have another comment, but it's more of a question as long. But Halsey's charter if I recall, after I went through it over the weekend, it follows pretty closely what the model charter that was submitted as well, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that format really well.
Just kind of as a quick clarification, in the end of doing the entire charter redo and revisions, are we looking to kind of change some of the verbiage as far as making it easier to read by the general public, or are we trying to stick to more legalese terms and phrasing?
I think that's really at the discretion of the committee. I don't think that we're bound to one style or another style. So if the committee feels that the language is not accessible, we can certainly suggest changes to that.
I just know that sometimes, even though it's perfectly clear legally,
Mm.
it sounds kind of off and unclear.
Mhm.
I noticed that too. I do believe we need to stick with some verbiage because it protects us, the way it's written, while other instances could be clarified slightly to make it easier for any council. The interpretation is clearer and it's not questioned.
It looks like from a legal standpoint, some legalese is necessary and some legalese is not necessary. And so I think we can certainly, as you go through, if there are things you want to make more simple, if you ever, I mean, feel free to do that. And if there's ever a problem, I will certainly let you know.
Well, I'm not great at legalese, but I would like to make it as simple as possible. So if I suggest something and it's out of line, just absolutely feel free.
I doubt you will.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
I don't know. I can try.
So I have a question. In chapter 1, we can start with section 1. Is there something there that was a change that anybody thought was better than what we have?
I do like the way that some of the other cities referred to their current chapter with an actual date, whether the calendar year, and also referring to where they started with in that revision. So I think it was one of them referred to like the 1980s version, but it was their 2010.
I believe that was Halsey that did that.
Was it Halsey as well?
Yeah.
I know Lebanon did something similar as well.
And that's actually from the model charter.
Oh,
as well.
yeah. Thank you for including that too. That was very beneficial.
So does anybody have anything to change with section 1, chapter 1? Any input?
Should, in keeping with the previous suggestion as far as sections and subsections, should these two sentences, being that each one is really a sentence unto itself, the entirety of the section, should that be subsections or should we just simply, because I actually what I'd like to do is I would like to make a motion at this point that we reformat the entirety of the charter to follow a section subsection numerically and alpha if necessary, and if there are alphabetized or subsections of subsections.
Just to clarify, are you suggesting that we follow the numbering convention that's used in the model charter?
Yes, I
That-
am.
That
Yes, I am.
style? Okay.
I like that. I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Getting stuff done already, guys.
Here's one of my questions as far as legalese versus just standard speak is in section 1, the second part, it says the city includes all territories within its boundaries as they now exist or are legally modified. The city maintain as a public record, or should it be as part of a public record? Or that's just kind of one of my clarifying questions. I mean, there's a lot of these throughout here. Just that I know if somebody's going to pull this up online because I'm not somebody, but it's just like, oh, I understand what it means, but at the same time, is there a way to add or omit?
We can. I will just tell you in terms of public records in government in general, the document itself, the map would be considered a public record. So I think
Okay.
that's why
And
it's
that's again,
yeah.
it's just clarification. I'm just trying to figure it out. And if there should be anything in there about, I read, it wasn't part of one of these. I think it's Beaverton or something. It says current and future in that verbiage for that same line as well. Just to kind of cover themselves.
So you don't think the or are legally modified doesn't account for that?
It's just
That's
it's
too
just
much
one of those
legalese.
it's just one of those things just clarifying. I know that especially like most textbooks, most successful books, most newspapers, publications are written at a lower understanding and reading level to legalese and collegiate level vocabulary. So that's just one of those things. Again, I'm just gonna kind of pick at.
Josh, may I? Another thing that I, you know, as far as language goes, I won't make a motion at this time, but I would suggest that we consider in the second part of our new, which is section 1. It says the city includes all territory within its boundaries as they now exist or are legally modified. The city will maintain public record and accurate and current description of the boundaries. I would like to see us change that word from will to shall, because shall is compulsory as opposed to will, which is semi-compulsory, but one can argue the way around will as to whether or not someone will do something. Shall compels us to do so. I believe in Black's Law Dictionary that shall is the absolute and will is a step down from shall. I would refer to or defer that to Blair.
Typically in law, shall is more powerful than will and is more typical in statutes and ordinances and charters.
Then I think we should make the change.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
If there's no other discussion on chapter 1, for chapter 2, you'll note in your packets, I did include the proposed charter amendment language. So I think for purposes of this meeting, we'll skip section 3 and we'll revisit that for discussion after the May election.
If we are moving on to section 2, that was a good catch by staff, because I don't know how many times I read that and I saw statute where it says statue. So I make a motion that we change in what is now section 2 of, or section 1 of section 2, change the word statues to statutes, as was intended, I am certain.
If there any motions for all these little minor edits, I guess I'll second that. It just seems like a little clerical.
Yeah, I think we can just go by consensus on those smaller things.
I withdraw my motion then.
And then I don't know if this is something that the committee is interested in discussing, but in section 4, you'll note the charter directly calls out the positions that council is to appoint. I don't know if anyone feels differently about those required positions.
Only that I feel that since they are specific positions or offices, that they should be capitalized.
Is there any consensus on that, discussion on that?
If I may, I would say that I think we should go consensus on that, that is, would fall into a housekeeping type
I can see it
situation.
kind of continuing throughout this process.
But on that same section, I think that once again, for language clarification, after we're in the first sentence, the council shall appoint and keep in office a city attorney, city manager, who shall serve as city recorder, and a municipal judge who shall hold office subject to the discretion of the council. Once again, this is another one of those sentences that if you break the sentence down, it makes it sound like the municipal judge is the one that is holding office subject to the discretion of the council. And so my suggestion would be to change the word who to 3 words, each of whom.
I'm seeing some heads nodding, looks like consensus, but is there any discussion on that?
No.
Okay.
Just for point of clarification, because you were talking and I was writing at the same time, so I missed part of it. You're talking throughout the document or just in that instance?
Just that sentence.
Okay. Because throughout the document, I notice that it doesn't talk about the position as in a position, but they're constantly going back to his or her office. And it should be their office or as appropriate, because it's a position, it's not person, it's a position. And I think that that's old language that was updated but needs to be neutralized. It's a common practice in documents to clear up those kind of archaic issues.
Is there any discussion on that? No problem. Okay, great.
So moving on to section 5.
And we did get the question, does the city have a treasurer? And here the finance director serves that role. So there could be discussion as to whether the treasurer is the appropriate title in the charter, but functionally it wouldn't affect anything.
But going back to what Mike was talking about a little bit ago, is for clarity for people, just like I raised the question in the first place that, who is our treasurer? I think we should change that to our finance director.
I agree. It would be more clear.
The only thing that I'll say about that, so for example, we're in the position now where we have someone in a dual role. It's perfectly possible in the future that you could have a city manager that would serve that function as well. I don't know if that affects how you feel about modifying the position title.
I know that we have, Chief Ogden is a really good example of that. But I would hesitate with the demands of the city manager, trying to manage both of those things in a slowly growing city, that the legal requirements of both positions can be overwhelming. And I really think we need to make sure that if we loosen that up, that somehow that we always be cognitive of that. And so a finance director, treasurer, whatever that is, that we retain that position. I've just seen it's too easy to get on the wrong path, and it takes so long to get anything cleaned up. I would highly recommend being cautious about that.
Yeah, I think in keeping with that is what we could do just to make sure that it is identified, is that we could change it to from treasurer to treasurer / finance director, because that way it keeps the original intent that we have somebody needs to be responsible for our financial situation and our monies and our accounts, and it changes it from something that is a little bit unclear because of the fact that we do not have anybody in that position. So I like that idea, and just treasurer / finance director. That way we make sure we've got it covered. Remain keeping it covered in the charter.
Consensus?
Josh, I don't really have a concern about that, but I am just curious about, and such other officers, what would be an example of that? Or is there an example now in place that of other officers that might be here at the city?
Are you asking about section 5?
Yes.
So section 5 basically gives the city manager the power to create positions. So for example, when I was hired, they created the administrative services director position because there was a need that I could fill there. So it gives the manager more flexibility to manage the day-to-day administration, which is the role of the manager and not the council.
It is a perfect example while the council had to authorize the budget for that position. And that was the safety mechanism for that.
And I can only assume that during the next review of the charter that that position would be added in text form that was created in the meantime.
No, so the positions that the manager creates don't end up being codified in the charter itself. It allows for more flexibility as needs change.
Okay.
And I know there was a question in the last meeting about bonds. That does not seem to be a consistent practice based on the comparisons that I looked at. So I think it could be for the committee to decide, does that need to stay in our charter? Is that something that we could look at potentially removing?
For it.
My concern there is, having been in an organization where all officers had to be bonded, and then what happened with the chamber here in Sweet Home a number of years back, and people were not bonded, I would hesitate to remove bonding requirements for that very reason. The liability to the city might be potentially disastrous.
I would agree.
Attorney Blair, what do you think?
It's kind of it's not something that's legally required. It's certainly something that's within the city's power to require. Certainly some cities have done fine without it. Other cities require it. I'm not sure that there's really a legal reason why you would have to, or a legal reason why you would have to remove it. It's purely up to the city if that's something that is important. I will say I was about to search the rest of our code because the way that's written, it requires ordinances to follow up and require that. Because the text says if ordinance required in section 7 is what we're talking about. If ordinances require every person appointed to an office or place of public appointment in the city or entering into a contract with the city shall give the city a bond. And so it puts it purely in the council's authority to pass an ordinance that would require that bonding. I'm not aware. I was just about to search for the word bond in our code to see if other ordinances had been put into place.
And keep in mind that the bond for the manager is also addressed in a future chapter. So even if section 7 was removed or modified, that's the language regarding the bond for the manager would need to be considered separately.
So the city, currently the city manager and the attorney are both bonded. Is that?
Attorney is not bonded.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And then this is when we hire contractors or anything like that, because it says persons appointed to an office.
Mhm.
This is just, it looks like this is just employees.
No, I believe the intent is also, for example, for a public works contract, that the
into a
contract would be
contract.
bonded.
And just in
And-
my brief, really quick search through the rest of the code, it appears that contracting is the only areas that really mentions bonds. As you mentioned, section 20 of the charter does require a bond from the city manager, but none of the other ordinances appear to require a bond for any other employee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of show a little bit of my ignorance here, but at the same time, from a contracting background, anytime I've ever come across an RFI from a city or any kind of municipality, it's always required separately in its verbiage that you be licensed, bonded, and insured. So do we need to restate it? And I didn't realize that some employees of the city needed to also carry a bond just for employment, or
So right now it's just the manager where that's the requirement.
And section 20 seems to do that just fine. This particular paragraph doesn't really seem to do much because it has that ordinance requirement that that the ordinance would have to require it. If you didn't have this provision of the charter, you could still have ordinances requiring a bond. There's no reason why the charter has to include that requirement. So you could eliminate it and put it in squarely in the hands of the city council to determine if bonds are necessary in different areas.
Having heard that explanation, then I would have no heartburn over removing it entirely because it's something else and that will add confusion if we have ordinances already where the city determines which ones need to be bonded and like that, then I'm good with that, the way that it is.
It does seem a little bit superfluous with that if ordinance require provision.
Is there a motion?
I would so move to remove section 7 as it's currently stated.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
Anything with section 8?
On, jumping down, I suppose. Oh, wait. I've already jumped to 11.
So I know one of the charges from the mayor was to look at the terms of office. So section 10, and you probably saw in the spreadsheet, staff is recommending that the committee propose a potential change. So right now, the way that it's written is that the new counselors take office is that the first Monday of January following the election. But the way that we hold our meetings, it basically, those counselors that are coming off of council, let's say there was an emergency and we needed to convene an emergency meeting, the ones who are cycling off council, my concern would be that they would not want to participate in that because to them, they already know that they're off of council and there's been some confusion about when that term ends. So I would just like the committee to discuss tightening that up so that it's more clear to those who are coming in that they do have responsibilities to perform as counselors.
Or more clear to those going out that they have a
Also true.
responsibility until the new council is sworn in.
I do believe when I met with the mayor of Halsey, he did they do have something, I gotta go back and read it, but they do have something to where after the election, they do have a meeting right away to get all that stuff out of the way. Instead of waiting till the second Tuesday of January when the election is in November. So I know they don't do it until January, but because technically your term is over December 31st, technically. So that is up for discussion. I think we do need to do something there. And that's up to you guys.
So that being said, Josh, where does it actually say where the terms end?
So it doesn't call it out specifically, but I think the implication would be that if the new term starts the first Monday of January following the election, technically the outgoing counselors serve until the first Sunday of January. But I think in practice, that's never really been well understood here.
If nothing else, it could be clarified to say that the term doesn't end until a new counselor is sworn in, or something like that.
But for example, this year, we wanted to do a training for the council before the first business meeting. So technically we had counselors who it was their second day of office according to the charter, but they hadn't been sworn in, but they did convene as a body for a meeting. So it was just a little bit odd this year. And so I think that's why I'd like the committee to discuss modifying that.
Well, and that brings up section 11 though, because it says that before they can conduct their duties, they have to take an oath. Well, if their term has already started and then you have an emergency or something, but they haven't taken an oath yet, you run into that gray area.
But they don't make any decisions outside of a formal council meeting, so they haven't been sworn in. So the idea of having a training even in December or for end of November would not be unusual, because the fact is they're not making any formal decisions. It's simply a training. And if you're recommending new counselors attend it, good luck, because a lot of them won't anyway. And so I don't know that this can be addressed with this issue, because.
Well, so for example, one of the options would be that terms of office must, for example, coincide with the final meeting of the year of the election. So we would essentially have outgoing and incoming at the same final meeting in December, do the swearing in with the effective date so that they know, okay, Jan 1 or whatever you pick, they are in their roles.
So they would be sworn in at the final calendar meeting of the previous year.
Correct.
But they generally cancel that if it's too close to Christmas. So we usually have only one meeting in December.
And that's
So
why
you're moving it up all the way to almost a full month.
Well,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm saying you could do the swearing in with their term to be an effective date of, for example, January 1st, but then they've done their oath in advance. They can technically take their seats January 1st. And if you leave it open that it coincides with the final meeting in the month, then we don't get tied to a date for when there are cancellations.
So if they're sworn in December, first meeting, does that technically, that makes them a counselor legally? So are they entitled to the stipend and other things?
So I don't know that the oath itself is what legally makes them.
It just says that they have to have an oath before entering upon the duties of their office. I think actually, if you want to have a simple solution to the problem that has the least change in language, it would be to add a sentence somewhere that says the term, your term continues until the new council is sworn in. And so that would make it so that if you have new councilors being sworn in the first meeting in January at 6:30, up until that point, until they take an oath, the previous council is still in place. And then upon taking that oath, the new council taking that oath is when their term ends and the new council begins.
I think that makes more sense because it's easier to keep a outgoing counselor on track with that language than an incoming counselor who hasn't read the charter yet. And so, because if you move the date up into December, that's really going to muddy up the water and really confuse the public. Yeah.
I think the only potential hangup with that is throughout the year, once or twice a year, Lynn County Elections contacts us and they need to know the actual end date of the terms of the current seated counselors. So if we don't know for sure that we're going to have that first meeting on the second Tuesday in January, that gets a little bit muddy, to use your word. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Could we just make it January 1st?
You can make it January 1st. You just have to change that oath of office requirement because, or require them to come in December sometime to take an oath.
When
of
I
office.
got elected, I was itching. I didn't want to wait till the second Tuesday.
Mhm.
So I'm just saying.
Well, or we could, we could modify section 11 so that you can build in a time frame for when the oath has to be taken. If we modify it so that you don't have to do it before entering upon the duties, that can solve that issue as well. But
You could just change it to say each officer at the first meeting of January of their new term shall take an oath of office. And so that it's not, that would leave them with possibly up to a week where they would be a counselor without having an oath. And I'm not sure that they would do much damage during that time. I could be wrong. Reasonable minds can differ. I suppose.
Well, and as individuals, they have no power. So when you have an emergency meeting on January 2nd, for some reason, you just have to swear them in at that first thing in that meeting, correct?
That's
And
true.
who does the swearing in here? The city manager? Okay.
Some places I've seen the municipal judge do it too.
But not the council chair anyway.
No, I probably not, because theoretically you could have somebody brand new elected to that, and you want somebody who's already in a position to do the swearing in.
So all
Oh,
that
good.
being said, is there any clarity that needs to be made around that whole process of who does the swearing in the charter?
The way it's written here, it just says that it focuses on the counselor, his or herself, that they have to take an oath. It's not really I guess it's not really caring about who guides them through that process. The important thing is that they take the oath.
Yeah.
So I guess just to go back, so are we looking at modifying both sections 10 and 11 individually to address different issues? So for example, section 10, is there a consensus from the committee in terms of clarity on the commencement of the term of office? Did we want to move it back to Jan 1?
That's
I like that. I like the fixed dates. December 31 being the end of the term and January 1 being the beginning of the term. And sorry.
I like the fixed date as well because that solves your problem when Lynn County contacts you to find out when terms expire. And then we could change that to the 1st of January. And then on the oath of office,
That could, I mean, that could stay the same and you just.
Just
if
next
they're-
regular
If
meeting.
they're going to meet.
You're
then you
right.
have- Even if it's an emergency meeting, you have a quick oath of office quick before the meeting starts.
so yeah, I think that would cover it. Change it to January 1st.
And leave section 11 the same.
Because then it's incumbent on the city to make sure they're all sworn in by January 1st.
We need a motion for that since we're changing it, or is that housekeeping?
I don't think that's housekeeping. I think.
I think that's pretty
Yeah, I think we need
substantial.
to move
but
that
yeah.
Yeah, because you're assigned states.
So moved. Change it to January 1st.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So backtracking just a little bit, I know that we're going to avoid looking at some things because there's an election coming up in regarding to some verbiage. In section 8, is that one of the ones that we're going to kind of hold off on really quick? Or I'm just wondering at the bottom, just really quick. So it says reside in the city at least 1 year, be nominated for council, for mayor, but we know that that's possibly going to change. But could we add in there, they must reside in the city for at least a full calendar year prior to being nominated or prior to running?
But this
or
is an
however
issue
that's
because
gonna
we
end up.
actually don't nominate candidates for council. People
For
choose.
mayor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it says nominated for the council or for mayor. So if someone wants to run for council, they put in their form. There's not a nomination process for them. And
Do you think section 8 could be referring to chapter 4 regarding filling of vacancies?
I guess I'm looking more specifically at the very last sentence of section 8 where it
Yeah.
says
Right.
qualified elector who has resided. It's
So-
just for the mayor,
So are you saying?
but
it
not for
should be-
council.
Remove the word nominated and put elected?
Well, I don't know how that's gonna go. So I mean, I know that that's something coming up
Oh, I see
possibly,
what you're saying.
but I'm just wondering if we can clarify that, prior to being either nominated or elected or running for the
you could say
mayoral
that they're
position.
anyone residing in the city for at least 1 year is eligible.
Yeah, but that's
to be
right. That's
elected.
kind of what it says, but I was just hoping we could add for a full calendar year,
Well,
just so somebody's not trying to like, well, if I.
Well, I believe
I'm gonna miss
that
it by
the
3 days.
county requires, and they have to verify that you've been a resident for more than 1 year, correct?
They do. I don't think the year is their requirement, but yes, they do run through the candidates to check their registration.
For a full 365 kind of thing.
365 as of when?
But in the interest of
Prior to,
Prior to what?
I would say prior to even putting your name out there.
Prior to when you start your term or prior to when you?
That was.
prior
what I
to
was-
the election.
That's what I'm trying to
term?
think.
Yeah.
I was kind of reading it as they had to have been here 1 full year prior to throwing their name in the hat.
And
Well,
you,
that's sometime in August. That's a date that changes slightly every year based on the county elections office of when.
as city attorney, what do you believe the intent of that language was?
I think the intent, it seems to me that the intent is that anybody who's on the council or who is serving as mayor has lived in the city for at least a year. But I don't think they ever really clarified when that year starts or ends.
So it's actually clarified through our code rather than in the charter. So currently the code states that at least 1 year immediately before the election. So for example, if the election was on November 6th, it would have to be November 5th of the prior year.
So our code already covers it.
So it would be a question of, do you want to strengthen that requirement in the charter? And do you think it should line up with the code?
It would make it easier for people that are confused if they want to run for office and go, "Oh, I've only lived here 11 months and I won't be here for a full year until I am sworn into
Yeah,
office, where
we did
other
that.
people might argue just the opposite. I won't be sworn in until I've been here for a year, therefore I'm eligible to run. So clarification is always good.
So are you suggesting to modify the charter language to reflect what's currently in the code?
Yes.
My thinking is our charter is only like 9 pages long. It's a lot easier to read than the code. for
Yeah, and it's
people-
kind of be the go-to. So
Well,
it's
not
kind of
only
a
that,
copy
but-
and paste.
Not only that, but the council can change the code later if they wish.
And they can't
so
change the
If
charter.
you want them to be bound by that, then the charter would be the place to do that. I guess just, and that's a good point to bring up as you look through these things. When you're considering things to put in the charter, the main difference between the charter and ordinances is that the council has the power to change ordinances, but they don't have the power to change the charter. And so if there is ever any issue that you think is important enough that you don't want the council messing with,
That belongs.
then that's an appropriate thing to be in the charter.
This seems like one of those things to me.
Absolutely.
Whatever that start date is for the 1 year.
Would that require?
All right, so just to clarify, the language would be changed to say that in order to be eligible for office, you must be a resident of the city of Sweet Home for at least 1 year prior to the election or prior to the term of office.
I would think election, but that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I agree, election.
Yeah, because if we change it to anything else, then we'll have a code conflict and we'll have to modify code as well.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, and I think that's something that you would want to vote on, not be consensus, if that was what your question was.
Yes, that was. So yeah, I will need a motion and a vote for that one, please.
I move that we change that language in, where were we?
Section 8.
Section 8. Any qualified elector who has resided in the city at least 1 year as of the date of the election may be nominated. Actually, if we don't do nomination, let me retract my motion for a moment. Let me think for a second.
May I help you with?
May run rather than, okay, my motion would be any qualified elector who has resided in the city at least 1 year as of the date of the election may run for city council or for mayor.
May I make a friendly amendment, make it 1 full year?
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Second. Discussion, right? I guess it doesn't matter. I guess if the thing we're voting on passes, I guess it would still apply. Never mind.
Well, and I'm making notes or some keeping track of various changes in a document on my computer as we go along. And I think we have obviously the minutes for this meeting and a record. Once we get further down the road, we can have actual drafts of the language showing what has changed for you to review and for you to vote on again to solidify that this is definitely the language you want. I don't think you should feel like you're committing yourself to specific individual words. I think we're at the point of just what is the intent that we want to change in there, and we can wordsmith it and bring it back to you later.
That's because I'm questioning whether or not the clarity on that needs to say that 1 full year before a filing for an election deadline, right? Because that way it's clear that it's from that day. The day that you are able to, and the election deadline is done, right? That last day, you have to have been 1 full year before that. And that way, I think that's might be a clarifying point that might help if it's questioned.
So that language would actually be in conflict with the current
Yeah, I was
code.
gonna,
So, which if that's what the committee wishes to do, that's
I'm just
yeah.
asking if you need to have it that finite or not.
I think it's kind of up to you. When do you think, when you think of the average person deciding to run for office, the first thing you look at when you decide to run for office is when is election day. And so that day is going to be on your mind. That's probably a more generally known day than the registration deadline that the Secretary of State requires.
I think people are running for those seats know very well when that deadline is. And that they have to have been here a year before that deadline. It has come into question. This has been a very contentious point. And so I think that anything we can do to shore that up.
Yeah, I think we can definitely put the language in the charter so that it's even clearer than what's in the code, because even the code sounds a little
So
loose.
I guess I would ask the committee then, do you want this to be 1 full year as of the date that they submit the form? Or the deadline to submit the form to run, or do you want it to 1 full year prior to?
What is the
Election day.
typical time frame between the registration date and an election?
Typically the end of August, I think is the deadline.
So is it 30 days,
mid-August.
60 days,
So in our-
90 days?
In our code, the last day to file is 64 days before the election date.
So can
Calendar
we,
days.
yeah, so
Does it say calendar
we
days?
use that.
I think
Yeah.
a day is a day is a day.
64 Sundays.
I think because we normally open to apply like early August, right?
It runs from 100 days before to 64 days before.
May I make a point of order?
Mhm.
The discussion has gotten off of the actual motion, and it's not germane to the actual motion. I actually would like to see us continue this discussion, and so in order for it to be in order, I would like to withdraw my motion so that this other discussion can continue. We haven't voted yet. Yeah, we have not voted yet. Yeah. So I withdraw my motion so that we can more fully develop our ideas on this.
So there was an election, I think it was 2 years ago, where somebody ran and won, and they did not meet the legal requirement to do so. And so they had to withdraw that position, and nobody was in that seat. And so I think if we were to make a date, I think it needs to be prior to signing the form that you're going to run for office. I think you need to be for 1 year.
I agree. You need to be in Sweet Home as a resident for a full 365 days prior to saying, I want to run for office, or I want to be mayor, or something like that.
So the opening day of being able to sign up for council,
Yes.
first day, whatever that is.
So do you want it fixed to that first date, or do you want it to be the date that the candidate drops it off? So for example, do we want it to be 365 days, 100 days before election day, or is it 365 days and I filed on the 83rd day?
No, I think it needs to be straightforward, the 100-day.
Yeah.
When we open to apply to run, that is the 100th day is when it opens, right? That's the day.
So not to throw a wrench in it. If we get so specific with the number of days in the charter, and this discussion has come up before, we actually have a very short filing
We
period,
do.
shorter than a lot of other places. It doesn't follow the Secretary of State standards for the filing period. So if we put 100 days in the charter, we are locking ourselves into not being able to have the code flexibility to open that up for a longer filing period in the future. Now, if that's what the committee wants to do, that's totally fine. But I know there have been discussions with some constituents here that they would like to see the code changed so that it's a longer filing period because that's more accessible. So again, if we're going to lock in with a specific number in the charter, that becomes more challenging.
That's over 3 months. I guess I'm not understanding that.
I'm just letting you know feedback that I've received because again, we do have a shorter filing period than a lot of other places.
Like on the school board, you want to get like 60 days. It's like February when it starts, you got to tell,
I just think that the closing date, the deadline is the easiest one to track. Because the beginning may shift, but there has to be a deadline, you know, so. And I know that gives you more time one way or the other, but you know. Or I think it's just easier.
Or we could leave it open and just
This is
state,
up to the committee.
yeah, you could just state the first day of filing or the final day of filing. And then if the code changes, that it leaves it fluid in the charter.
Rather than having a specific hard number,
Correct.
allowing it to open that up for a longer filing period. Whether
Correct.
we want it to be the beginning of the filing
Mhm.
period or the end deadline of that filing period.
Right. The only issue with that, you know, then you get into the thing where, okay, I'm reading the charter, but now I got to go look at code because I don't know what it is. So you have to balance that challenge. Correct.
Easier.
Right. So again, I just know sometimes there's a preference to want to put everything in the charter so you don't have to refer to other things outside the charter, but this might be one of those where you want to retain that flexibility. But again, that's totally up to the committee.
If somebody comes into the office and asks a question, I want to run for city council. What are the requirements? It's clear what the requirements are, right? So this could be added to that. So you guys, it's up to you guys.
Do you think it allows people more leniency and time to decide if it was before the deadline to follow? I mean, if it's going to behoove them to do it sooner than later if they're going to run, as far as putting signs and things like that and publicity and social media. But if they want to chance it and wait till the last second, I mean, that's going to be 100% on them.
And they do.
And they
Yeah.
do. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I started running way before I even applied. So it's up to the person.
I'm all in favor of having more requirement on the long length of time they're here. So I'd rather be stacked at the front of the thing. I'd rather people
Okay.
here almost 2 years before they're
Yeah, agreed.
doing, running the council meetings and being up here doing that job versus, so I'm more in favor of the beginning of that filing period.
That's a good point.
And how do we feel about the year?
I think at the year minimum. I mean, you don't want somebody making decisions in regards to a city they've only lived in for
Right.
6 months. I mean, I've met those people.
I think one of the things you're also going to run into, the thing that comes to mind the most is the number of people who live just outside city limits or who have lived in the area and consider themselves residents of Sweet Home. And they, for such a person, if they move into city limits and want to eventually run, do you want to stick with just a year because that would allow some of those folks to move and get prepared, or do you make it longer?
I think there's a difference of the investment that people have lived within the boundaries of the city for a year prior, have paid taxes. And so when they make decisions about that money, they have a vested interest in it. And if they have been on the edges of the town and not lived in, they haven't had that investment. And so,
No, my point was that if you were gonna have it be longer than a year,
okay.
no.
you're gonna have some folks who have been in the area for their whole lives, but they haven't, and
I worry about it being challenged if it's longer than a year.
Hmm.
I worry about a year is a responsible amount, but if it's beyond a year, then it could seem punitive. And so,
Challenged by whom? I guess challenged by whom to whom?
people challenge all kinds of
I guess as long as they're not violating some kind of statute.
Yeah.
denying them their right to run for an elected office. People like to take up those things. And so I just think that, I mean, if you want to make it 15 months or 13 months or something, I'm not going to argue about that. I'm just saying that it's easier to justify a full year.
Well, and keep in mind too, as we get further in this process, you're going to have to make decisions as to how you want these things to be packaged. So for example, if we go for a total charter amendment, put it all in one, but people are really up in arms about a change in residency requirement, it could tank the whole rest of the charter change. So we'll have to have that discussion when we get further with our edits, but just keep that in mind.
I will say that longer than 12 months is very unusual.
I think 12 months is.
I think it's a good number. I just think it should specify 1 full calendar year prior to the opening of,
Yeah, that one. So moved.
Registration.
Opening fine. I'll just make a motion for that.
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Yay.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Good talk.
And Blair, you were speaking to the fact that later on down the road, we'll be able to get a copy showing kind of what we've changed. So that will be kind of in a format of a single line stricken omissions and maybe like,
In fact, I've got question marks all over mine because that I don't know exactly how to word it, and there'll be probably some discussion on exactly on wording it just the right way. I don't want to bog down
no,
the
that's
committee
fine.
with that. I'd rather bring a draft to you that I've already worked through, and then you can change it to your heart's content.
Can I make a personal request that on that layout or that format when we get it, that the new stuff is bold and not just in color because I'm colorblind. So
I was
I'm gonna-
actually going to ask.
gonna go
so
for
I'm glad
bold.
you said something.
You were going to ask if you're
Yeah.
colorblind?
I was going to ask if anyone was colorblind. If that would affect how.
I was gonna ask what else. What else is wrong with me?
It's just a really invasive question.
I have one further motion on that same issue, just to get that back in, as we discussed before. I would like to see it change in that same section, but change it from maybe nominated for counselor or for mayor, may I speak clearly? Thank you. To may run
Mhm.
as a candidate for council or for mayor.
I believe that's what he said, right?
Based on the
Yeah.
on the discussion, I believe that was kind of the gist of what your motion was. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
I withdraw then.
Could I suggest that although you're bolding the language, underline it as well? So you're striking out anything that's being potentially taken out, but also underlining the pieces that are being recommended. So.
Okay. Thank you.
That would also be like, because eventually I would like, once we get through a lot of this stuff and we have like a rough draft, I would like to have a public forum. And then the public would be able to see on paper, printed out, all of the changes and what we're going to be doing. So that would be in line with that. So section 9.
So in doing the comparison, it was only a special election section was only in about half of the charters that I looked at. And just to clarify, in Lynn County, it does not look like we would have the ability to call a special election outside of a normal election time. In speaking with the clerk's office this year, working through the proposed amendment, we are tied to their calendar. So I don't even know that this section is necessary. Because if council were to call for a special election, it would have to line up with the county calendar anyway. So
Are there ever any examples of this ever happening? You know, Blair, or should I call Bob up? Ask if he remembers.
Yeah, I don't know. I have heard of elections taking place at different times than the standard times that the county elections does it. They're just prohibitively expensive.
in talking to them, they said we would have to line up with one of the 4 standard times that
if we were going, because if you don't, I think we still would have the power to do an election. We just would have to do all of it ourselves.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be
You
able
have
to
to foot
use
the whole bill.
you wouldn't be able to use the typical vote by mail system and the ballots and everything.
Oh, I see.
We'd have to print our own ballots. We'd have to,
And then the problem with that would be the challenges of election integrity and everything else.
I
And
mean, it's a
that's
whole
what- yeah.
bag of hurt. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't. really
Yeah,
wanna
because
be
I think we
involved in it.
currently piggyback on their authentication and their mailings and everything else.
What are the four besides May, November?
I can't recall off the top of my head, but I think you can call one in August and
Oh.
March, I believe. There are two off times that very rarely get used. Also because they have much more difficult thresholds for things to pass on those two,
If it's money, right?
and it costs money.
Well, that, I mean, yeah. So 4 times a year, that's quite a few, really, if you needed it. Okay. Well, I move we strike section 9 then.
You want the option to be able to do an emergency.
I withdraw my motion, but that being said, is there any provision in statute for the county commissioners to appoint counselors? If there's enough of them gone?
I'd have to research.
I don't believe so. And we may need to save this discussion for the next meeting because we don't have chapter 4 agendized for discussion tonight. But right now, the charter is specific about how those vacancies are to be filled. So we're probably going to want to look at that language in the next meeting and determine if that's the process we want to keep in the charter. Because, for example, yes, if we lost half the council, right now, the remainder would do a full appointment to those seats rather than triggering a special election. So we should probably revisit that in the next meeting with chapter 3 and 4 in tandem.
When we do that, address that, I've already, formulated potential language that would serve us in that category.
Great.
So we are going to table section 9 until our next meeting.
Section 10.
I'm pretty sure we got the clarity we needed on section 10.
Okay.
And 11. So unless we want to revisit.
Actually, on section 10,
Yes.
we also, section 10 and section 13 of chapter 4 are contradictory. And so, yeah, I mean, we still need to address that.
Yeah. So we'll revisit that at the next meeting. Since
Okay.
It's going into chapter 4 as well. Is there anything we want to go back and revisit?
Any other discussion? As if we want to, since the agenda is only 2 chapter 4, I mean, we could carry on chapter 4 next meeting, or if there's any other discussion, we can keep going.
After the election, we also need to maybe revisit the council and mayor slightly because of the terms of office. It would leave some people at a disadvantage because you can't run for 2 positions at one time.
Correct.
And it needs to be fair and equitable to everyone. And so we might need to revisit that one at that.
Yes, following the charter amendment election, if it passes, we will need to
Yeah.
look at that language in terms of can a counselor keep their counselor seat if they're midterm and run for mayor, or do they need to forfeit the council seat to run for mayor, things like that. But we'll, again,
Yeah.
so we'll revisit that one when that
Yeah,
happens.
that was brought up the first meeting, that we will go over that after the election.
Which would make it the next meeting anyway.
Yeah.
And more until we get to the next chapters.
No further discussion? Okay.
So, Bert, sorry.
Oh my God.
Oh, my.
I heard the hammer there.
So, just to follow up on a question from the last meeting, so there was talk of hoping to establish a regular meeting cadence. So we're proposing the first Tuesday of the month at 5:30 p.m. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, as long, that was my thing, is just
Yeah,
as long as I knew in advance.
absolutely.
I can make everything else move.
And I do know if we agree to that, we are going to have to look at changing the July meeting. But we can revisit that.
And the only thing that I would add to it is realizing that, most people work for a living. And it is increasingly difficult on possibly other people on the committee. Is there any way that we can get a majority of us, let's say every other week instead of once a month? Because can potentially get protracted to the point where, it could be a year and a half before we get through all of this.
So honestly, if we keep pace like we have tonight, I'm thinking the committee is only going to have probably 5 more meetings, which might include the town hall. So I don't see a reason that this can't be wrapped up by the fall. Again, if we keep pace, because right now we're already a third of the way through. So we'll get through all the sections. We'll come back, do final revisions if we're going to have our public input process, make sure we compile all of that. It's
So-
also just tough with staff because we support other meeting bodies
So we're looking at first Tuesday of
each month,
each month.
except in July. So we'll need to figure that one out.
Unless you want to chair the first meeting in July, because I'm out of town that week.
I could do that if everybody else is available.
Yeah, we can do that, or we can do,
Well,
we can handle June and then we can see how far we get.
yeah, I was
We
gonna
can-
say, why don't we do June tentatively? I think that first of September, I might not be available.
Well, how about,
Tuesday of.
okay, so yeah, so let's plan to get through the rest of the charter in the next 2 meetings.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss in June, but maybe July is a good time to have the public input meeting or meetings. Give the committee a break in July to resolve that conflict. And then we'll have our final meeting in August to do the final review. And you guys can decide what you're going to recommend.
I like it. Can I adjourn?
Yes, you may, adjourn,
So the next meeting is June
whatever that first Tuesday is.
3rd.
Yes.
Happy birthday to me.
Oh.
I'll get him a Dutch Brothers gift card.
I had to go to a meeting on my birthday last year.
Yes, I did. Adjourn. I know, sometimes it's heavy and sometimes it's light. I'm taking this.
Class. Yeah. I went to try and